Good afternoon and welcome to Science Fiction Retirement Library. I'm here today to do a review of 10 books and tier rank 10 books, all pretty much science fiction from the 70s and 80s, but what they have in common is their science fiction book club editions. Now, I've had a little book caddy to the side of my desk for a while where a lot of these editions are all lined up, and I've said to myself that I should read a lot of them in a row or whatever. So I've done 10 in a row. It took about 9 weeks because of other things I'm reading plus work, etc. But it's pretty enjoyable. One thing I'll say before I start is covers do make a difference. Like when you transition from book A to book B, and if book B looks exactly the same as book A, you kind of get a little bit I don't know, like a little bit confused sometimes. Like there's a looking forward to a new book that's a different shape, a different size, a different cover, etc. Like with these science fiction book clubs these are all early 80s editions. I really like the kind of the stark square format. But there is an interesting psychological impact of transitioning from a book that looks exactly the same from the previous book, even if the story is completely different. So you'll see here I've got 10 books in a row, which was how I read them in a row. You'll see this one, Road to Corlay, is slightly different. It's out of sequence, really, or it's a different format, right? So it's an earlier format of the book club. The reason for that is I actually had The Dream of Kinship on the list, which is the same format, and then I realised, like an idiot, that that's number 2 in a trilogy. So I had to read Road of Corlay, and spoiler, I'm very happy I did. So that's the one that looks a bit like an outlier, but it's still pretty good in terms of the series. So what I'll do is I'll rank them and I'll talk about them, and I'll do a little bit of a synopsis of each book so you know what the feel for it is, like a 1-minute synopsis kind of thing, and then why I'm ranking it where. So number 1 is Poul Anderson's Avatar, which was 1978 originally, but this SFBC was in 1980. And basically humanity has expanded into space, and it's using mysterious alien gateways left behind by an ancient race known as the Others. I think that's been used before, the Others, but it works really well here. Diplomat and explorer Daniel Broderson, who's the main protagonist, joins a daring mission to find the fabled Chantry Guild, believed to be the heart of this vast interstellar network. So you've got these gates, you've got this kind of big intelligence of an ancient race that people are unaware of, and that's what sets the scene and the mystery, and it's quite effective. So as the crew travels far beyond known space, they encounter strange civilizations and confront profound questions about what it means to be human, to be free, to be moral, and to the limits of knowledge itself. Meanwhile, back in human-controlled space, political power struggles show that even a star-spanning civilization can repeat the same old patterns of control and ambition. So you've got 2 threads. One is this explorer unit of scientists, and then you've got what's happening in like Earth space while they're away. And it's kind of a really interesting juxtaposition between people thinking in a large scale and people thinking in a traditionally political, maybe world-based scale. And ultimately, the explorers do discover the truth about the Others, and it may transform their understanding of the universe and humanity itself. So I think it's kind of a thrilling space adventure, which is always good, right? But there's a philosophical undertones to it all. It does answer the question. So although I guess part of the premise, the ideas and concepts are intriguing, the ideas themselves are well built, they're well thought out over the 300 plus pages, and I think it did what I want all science fiction to do, which is to make me think about humanity today, like what we're doing today, and my future. I want to be open-minded or become more open-minded after reading a book, and this kind of does that, to be honest. So I don't think it's top shelf, and I'm going to do this in a relative way as well, because I'm doing 10 against 10, but also against my reading. So I think for Poul Anderson, I think it's deemed one of his best and one of his kind of classics. I think I'm going to put it on the higher shelf. So if you think about it, 1 to 4, I think it's good enough for that. It deserves a reread as well because it's quite deep in places. And the term of the Avatar, what is the Avatar, is a really interesting premise that still kind of sticks in my mind. So I think higher shelf is valid for that. Okay, so book one. Now, book two is a really interesting one. So it's by a guy called Leonard Daventry that I couldn't find a lot of information on, to be honest. And it was written in 1980. This book club edition with the brown cover is 1981. And if you look at the cover, it's got a very interesting cover. It's got kind of a shape or a head or something with wires in, which is a thing that kind of I noticed straight away. But this is the first book I've ever read by Leonard Daventry. You Must Remember Us, and as I say, I haven't heard anything about it. It was just one of those books that I got randomly in a hall or saw in a secondhand bookshop, I can't remember, and intrigued me because I like the covers, right? But basically, it's a dark and haunting tale about a group of survivors who are escaping a dying Earth. So it is a dying Earth tale, and the trigger point is they come across a derelict alien spaceship on their way to trying to find the next Earth. Now, some of the crew head over to this spaceship, and the main protagonist is kind of a very headstrong, interesting character called Captain Saunder, who's he's very caring about his crew. He's very set on finding this new kind of Pandora, kind of Eden type place for humanity to restart. But he's also a bit bitter because the crew he was meant to have on the new world, which is this spaceship, they all killed off as part of the dying Earth. So he's actually got like a ramshackle crew. I'm going to use ramshackle again later in this video. It's a ramshackle crew that he's kind of a little bit disappointed with because it's not the experts that he needs to do the job he needs to do, right? But anyway, they find this derelict spaceship, and it is, I said haunting, it's kind of dark and haunting. Reminds me of something like Alien or Unto Leviathan, which was a kind of an eerie sci-fi book I read maybe 20 years ago. And anyway, the crew goes over to this derelict spaceship to have a look, and it's either they bring something back or something is within them that makes them ill. And I'm not going to say too much more about that because it is kind of one of the main trigger points for the whole tale. But let's just say what follows is pretty engaging about what humans are capable of doing when it comes to the survival instinct. There's a massive foreboding. There's a little bit of horror all around. And then I can say that towards the end, some of them do find a planet, and that part is also pretty intriguing. So the more I talk about it, the more it sticks in the mind. And this is the interesting thing of doing this. So I think that I have to put it with Avatar, simply because I remember some of the imagery, some of the decision making, some of the story plot elements incredibly well. Like, I'm talking about it and they're coming back, especially within the New World spaceship itself. So when they're making decisions when people are getting ill, which is not a spoiler, you'll read it and you'll see very early on, the decisions they start to make surrounding their survival is coming back into my mind and making me feel things. So I'm going to put that as a higher shelf. So good start, right, for the first two. So that was the first book by that author, and I've got a few more like that on this list, so bear with me. So the good thing about these book club editions is there's a variation within them, right? So this is within the same series, and the Crystal Ship is actually a short story collection, or a 3 novella collection. And the good thing about the 3 novellas is they're all written by women. So it's an interesting introduction by Silverberg. Again, it's 1976, all 3 stories were written, but 1981 is the book club edition, so that kind of gives context to Silverberg. But he's a passionate supporter and promoter of women in science fiction, and this is his editorial presentation of 3 good candidates. And I think it does hit, as he said, and it's 3 female authors that I haven't read. So you've got Joan D. Vinge, Marta Randall, and Vonda N. McIntyre. I have to say Vonda N. McIntyre was the one that I was most excited about. The one I've heard the most about, and to be honest, probably this bears true towards that in terms of reputation. So the three stories: Crystal Ship. Silverberg presents three novellas about alienation, transformation, and rebellion, basically. The first one is called The Crystal Ship, which is the name of the book, and that's by Joan D. Vinge. We meet Tarawasi aboard a vast drifting crystalline vessel, which is the Crystal Ship. And the interesting thing is, like, it's described as a sedated community, a sedated human society. It's like it's above, and it's an evolutionary step, but there's something a little bit kind of tepid and unexciting about the whole thing. And Tarawasi, I think, was named specifically to maybe invoke some kind of human history, decides to flee to the surface of a planet that we don't really know much about, but it's a strange planet that basically has other evolutionary elements of humans past, let's say that. And she's basically on the search for something a bit more, people's origins, and she does meet especially one character where she starts to learn a little bit more about what happened in the Crystal Ship, etc. And it's short, it's compelling for sure, and I did enjoy it. And there is some real dreamlike, ethereal kind of elements to it, but it didn't hit me as much as other things. It's kind of a dialogue. The whole thing is kind of a dialogue, a philosophical dialogue, which is something I'd usually like, and I do like this, but it didn't hit all the buttons for me, let's say. Number two is Megan's World by Marta Randall. And you find out there's an augmented human engineer that lands on a world of aliens with cat-like, Mabel and Pip, cat-like feline, and they're facing exploitation. So she kind of becomes a little bit of a protector, and she's an outsider, but then gets embraced with the people. She actually, because she's a cyborg herself, an augmented human, she's shunned by the Terrans, so humanity. So also finds solace within this feline world. The problem is then there's a landing craft, and there's some more Terrans that come to try to understand what's going on. And it's an interesting play of, like we said, rebellion, alienation, outsider, what it means to be part of a community, a group, etc., and judgment of others and what's important, and maybe even things like integration and stuff like that, which is, we know in the world today currently is kind of an interesting topic to dive into. And this, from 1976, it was written, has small amounts of commentary on that, on what it means to be different, etc. So it was, again, well written, some intriguing things. There's a little bit of religion within this, in terms of the feline aliens that you think are kind of placid and other, then you start to see what they kind of worship and what they're into, let's say, what they hold true. But it was good, and it kept up the standard of the first one. Like, I was enjoying the reading of the novellas. And then the third one is Screwtop by Vonda N. McIntyre. And there's a planet called Kylise, which is pretty much edit that. So finally, the last one is Screwtop by Vonda N. McIntyre, and there's a planet called Red Sun, which is kind of you'd call it like a prison planet. You don't really find out much about it, who runs it, etc., in terms of why people are there. But there's a lady called Kylise, who's kind of described as a like a stowaway, an escapee from something. That turns there, and it's a hot planet. It's like a labor camp, and you go through finding out her and then two other characters, what they're doing within this harsh environment and how they interact with, is it called the screws? I presume the screw top. So it's kind of an age-old prisoner and prisoner warden kind of discussion. And I have to say, probably overall, it's the one that sticks in the mind, the one I enjoyed the most. I think it's probably because of the environment. I do like that kind of prison break, enclosed, like, again, rebellion kind of discussion. Like, how far can you go in the mind when the body is trapped. I've always thought if I was in prison, I would do loads of reading. Would I go mad, etc.? It's those kind of things. But it's the trio of characters, which could be in a thruple, which is a modern term, like a triad. There's a relationship going on between the three that you kind of have hints at in terms of at least a connection, like a love connection, maybe. But basically, one is the space rat, which is Khalees, and then you have a writer, and the third one is like a super intelligent being created through four parents, through like DNA experimentation. So as a three battling against like an oppressor and being trapped on a planet, it's an interesting mix of how like a passionate stowaway kind of buck versus like a more creative writing thinker, and then like this super intelligence, maybe a little bit more kind of binary decision making kind of AI type character. How they work together is quite interesting. So yeah, I'd say overall, probably in terms of in the memory, I don't think it grabbed me as much as especially You Must Remember Us, but also probably The Avatar. But they are short stories. They're punchy novellas, right? So, and all three of them, I think, like the middle shelf is kind of good in my opinion, right? And they were all good. It's just they didn't have the same impact as the other two. But I definitely recommend them. And Dream Snake, which is the kind of, I think, more famous Vonda McIntyre one, I'm definitely looking forward to read more Vonda McIntyre out of the three. And I think Dream Snake is kind of the next step. I think having the lozenge. So the fourth one, which is the Typhon intervention, is kind of hard to explain as well. Like, so it's another dying planet tale, not dying Earth, but dying planet. And like the blurb is, imagine our Earth under the quiet watch of a dying alien world called Typhon. So it's quite interesting when they're saying about under the quiet watch. For centuries, the Typhonians have studied our planet, convinced that it's the perfect new home for their ancient race, while humans remain unaware of the danger. So the foreboding that a lot of us like in sci-fi is there. The premise is compelling. It's kind of ready to go. And then there's kind of a military element that I'm not the biggest fan of generally, but there's a colonel called Andrew Mackay, and he's got like this special duty section that starts to understand something could be wrong here. So like intelligence services, and the thing that kind of triggers things is they believe that these Typhonians are already within or on the planet and are preparing something, a takeover or other. Now, what it is basically, what does the human race do in this kind of situation when they can't necessarily see their invader or their enemy? Yeah, and what we find is it's kind of a tale of the mobilization of the Earth defenses against an unseen threat, which again holds some interest, but I don't know, it was difficult to get excited about, and it felt pretty dated, to be honest. And even though there is telepathy at its heart, which I like from A. Van Vogt, and there's an interesting way of how they infiltrate, I just didn't get gripped at all within it, and I was pretty happy when it ended, to be honest. I couldn't even really tell you about the start, middle, and end. I kind of have these kind of little glimpses of memory. So compared to the other three that I read before this one just doesn't stick. So I'm going to put that in the lower shelf. I can't put it as the bottom shelf because there's some intrigue in there. And, you know, this was written, I think, also in 1981. I don't know anything about Douglas R. Mason, who wrote it. First book by this author, again, it doesn't really give me the impetus to go elsewhere and look elsewhere. I don't think, like Leonard Daventry, there's that much information or that much books about him. But yeah, I can't say I recommend that one because it was just a little bit dated. The trope has been done a lot and done a lot better, basically, is kind of my explanation. Okay, so book 5 is Under Heaven's Bridge by Ian Watson and Michael Bishop. So a joining of forces. Now, I had read some Ian Watson. Converts is the one that springs to mind. I haven't read Michael Bishop, and Michael Bishop is one that I did want to read. So this is again 1980, but the book club edition is 1981. And this is more interesting for sure than the Typhon intervention. So a multicultural scientific expedition arrives on the cold, distant planet of Onogoru. One of those ones that you can kind of say when you're reading, but not out loud. And it's orbiting one star of a binary pair, and that's quite important to the premise of the whole book. They actually come across an enigmatic alien race called the Cowper. And these Cowper are part organic, part machine. So the idea of cyborg is a big part of this story. And they inhabit vast ruined palaces and have the ability or often shut themselves down. So when the scientific expedition discovers them, they're kind of, it looks like they're in a trance, or they're not even turned on if they were a machine part, right? And you find out that this is actually part of what they do, which is called a Cowper trance. And the way Bishop and Watson kind of play out this, the ceremonial and let's say structural and community life that the Cowpers kind of carry out is the most interesting part of the book, to be honest. There's a doctor called Takahashi, who's the ship's linguist, which actually gets to the point of communicating with these Cowpers. And what she finds out is that the Cowpers, the star which they're orbiting is about to explode, go nova, basically. But the Cowpers are remaining calm and almost detached, is how it's described. So you've got this linguist who's made a breakthrough connecting with this alien race, part machine, part organic. And they're worried about the alien race because they think the alien race is going to perish because they know about the star. And the interesting kind of discussions here are, it's like a Star Trekian thing. Should I intervene? And if I do, what will happen? So as the human explorers struggle to understand whether the Cowpers are alive or machine, whether they value life as humans do, the mission becomes a meditation on identity consciousness and what it means to transcend species. Humans must confront their own assumptions, even if the night sky on Onogoru threatens to erupt. So this one had some really interesting concepts, which I've kind of gone into a little bit. And it's the cross-species, not just the communication, but the rites of passage, the ceremonial, the almost religious, that stay with you. And again, a little bit dreamlike. There's a part where, to understand the other species, they have to consume part of the species, for example, which is, it's not cannibalism, right? But it's, these guys are sentient. So it brings up a lot of interesting ideas. So the ideas of connecting physically and mentally with these alien entities obviously sparks fear and intrigue. And a bit like the Leonard Daventry before, there is a little bit of horror there, like a little bit of the body horror. But in general, it's just an interesting exploration into the first contact, but the philosophical human instinct for the first contact when the alien, how the aliens behave and live and feel is so alien that it's hard for you to forego your human instinct, right? So it could be higher shelf. I'm going to put it here because it was really good. I still think overall I enjoyed these two more. This one just had it's longer, it's like double the length, and it was more world building. This just, as I say, some of the imagery that was created, some of the things that happen that you don't necessarily think should happen sticks in the mind. But this was good, and I want to read more Watson anyway. I've got a few from a few hauls, but Michael Bishop as well. So together, and the picture on the front is quite good. That's how I was kind of imagining them. I don't know, it's because I saw the picture or just in general. So again, I just like that edition of the book. So on to The Road to Corlay by Richard Cooper. Now, as I said, I was meant to read A Dream of Kinship, and kinship and kinsman is an important title here. Now, the reason I didn't read A Dream of Kinship because it is part 2 of this trilogy to do with the white birds, but it's also I've got a lozenge, I think it's called The Custodians, which has the short story that triggered this whole world, right? But I have to say, so I said I'll read The Road of Corlay, obviously not The Dream of Kinship. I haven't read the short story, but this book has really given me the drive to investigate that the short story plus the other two books related to this book, and just to get me very excited about Richard Cooper. I don't know if other people feel the same, but so I'll give a little bit of a synopsis of the story, and then I'll tell you why I liked it. But on the eve of the fourth millennium, important, Earth has been reshaped by catastrophe. The great flood called the Drowning has drowned much of the land and toppled the old order. Now, the old order is explained in the short story, but it is mentioned obviously within this book. But in the fragmented archipelago of future Britain, I liked it because it was very British. It has a map. I know some of the places that what they are now and then what they're saying they would become. So that gave me a little bit of a step in that I quite enjoyed. But basically a powerful theocratic church rules with iron certainty. So this is pre this. Quashing dissent and spirituality beyond its strict discipline. Into this world arrives the prophecy of the white bird of kinship, which is, I think, the name of the series, which is a symbol of a new non-institutional spiritual movement. So a rebellion, like we were discussing within the Crystal Ship. This is another one about rebelling or fighting for some kind of freedom. A young boy piper appears, his music stirring hope and calling forth the latent faith of people long oppressed. The church fears this heresy, and so the seeds of revolution are sown. So this is the precept, if that's the right word, for this book, and it's described in The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, which is the short story from Custodians. So this is all just the framework for what's coming. So meanwhile, centuries later, the story widens, and a girl with clairvoyant gift and a man found adrift at sea become entwined in the prophecies unfolding. This is where A Road to Corlay starts. Basically, from the opening scene of a fork-tongued man pulled out of the sea, you then go on like this quest, like a Lord of the Rings-esque ramshackle, I said I'd use it again, kind of team or individuals, unorthodox relationships that spark up that are adjoined with their view of the white bird of kinship, that there must be another way to what we're experiencing now. And they kind of come up in villages and other things on this journey. So the fact that it's clairvoyant is always an addition, right? A clairvoyant gift. And the man found adrift at the sea with a forked tongue. That's the thing that stuck with me. That's the thing I remembered is forked tongue, hold on. And you find that out early, literally first pages. So they journey towards the legendary land of Corlay, seeking new meaning and perhaps a destiny they cannot yet understand. So the blurb says it means mystery faith in a quiet post-apocalyptic England, a tale of hope against control, of hidden truths and the slow turning of history. I love this one. There's actually another little element that I haven't even mentioned yet, but from the opening scene of a fork-tongued man being pulled out of the sea to the quest-like countryside journey and to the linked story. There's a linked story from the 20th century that I don't want to tell you too much about, but it's the thing that kind of opens it up to, hold on, what is happening here? I didn't want to put this down. And I look forward to reading the original short story, Piper at the Gates of Dawn, and A Dream of Kinship. There's elements of things like Silverberg's Night Wings. There's a book actually later, like the last one, The Winter Plane, that has elements. And anything that's kind of, I don't know, you could always say Book of the New Sun as well, in terms of, I'm starting to really like, I never thought I would, but I'm starting to really like the pseudo-medieval versus, space or whatever, or, it's science fiction. There's the spiritual versus the scientific. It was so fast paced. It was really adventuresome. And I have to say that it's on my top shelf. I think I gave it 5 stars on Goodreads, and it was very quick. It was very punchy, but there was a lot in there. And again, it's just the characters, the kinsmen, for example, are just really, I want to find out more about them. It's as simple as that. And just even the ideas of kinship, the ideas of what does the white bird represent, I want to find out. So that's my top one so far for sure. And talking of sure, which wasn't a deliberate segue, I think it's my seventh book, was the Ceres solution by Shaw. So I have read a couple of Shaw, so I am a fan, and I was looking forward to this one. Picture two human civilizations on a collision course. One is Earth in the 21st century. Society is hurtling towards self-destruction because of environmental collapse, nuclear disaster, etc. So again, a played out premise, but this is in 1981. And then meanwhile, on the distant world of Molan, humans have achieved great longevity and instantaneous teleportation. So a little bit like jaunting in Stars My Destination. And what it seems, the way it's played out early on in the book is that Molan and the Molanians are living in some kind of utopia. Now, the reason I like it is there's two characters, basically, and one of them is, on Earth, the wheelchair-bound young man, Denny Hargett. So he's wheelchair-bound, and for me, that's a really important tool within this whole story. Refuses to be defined by his disability and resolves to change his fate on Earth. And there's some really interesting scenes of him maybe contemplating suicide, right? So he's struggling that much, but he gets a break, he sees some things, a really interesting character. But then on Molan, the observer, so one of the observers of Earth, is called Gritana T. Iltha. I probably said that wrong. But she's sent to Earth to actually monitor on planet. And because they've got teleportation, they can do that pretty easily, right? And it's all about these, again, gates, not like the Avatar gates, but transit points within Earth and Molan. And she actually comes through a transit point where Denny sees her when he's younger. And from that point on, his life is kind of changed towards trying to find out what this is, basically. But also, Gritana finds herself drawn into Denny's world and starts to understand the cataclysmic events that are happening, but also the connection between the two civilizations. So Molan and Earth have an impact on each other, let's say. So basically, as their lives intertwine, it becomes clear that Molan's advanced society and Earth's desperate future are bound by a single hidden thread, which is basically the name of the book, the Ceres solution, which is to do with getting water to try to have environmental recovery of Earth, which has been devastated. But the fate of both worlds hangs on the choices of these two. I enjoyed this one, but mainly I enjoyed it because Gritana is seen as having this ability to teleport. The symbol of that from Shaw is ultimate freedom, right? So not just within your own planet, it's within the universe. And then you've got Denny, who's disabled pretty much all his life, who's hopeful but bitter, and he's quite caustic, he's quite witty. I quite like him as a character, how he interacts with people. And what I like is, again, all unorthodox relationships, those two coming together to address a situation that they're both aware of and part of, but from completely different sides of the coin, right? From utopia, pure freedom, to I'm living on, let's say again, a dying Earth, but I'm also within society limited with what I can do because of my physical predicament. So yeah, that's what made it. That's the heart of the book, is these two characters. And again, I enjoyed it. It was an adventure. It had some interesting premises. I probably enjoyed Wreath of Stars about the same by Shaw, but the Palace of Eternity I enjoyed a lot more. I think I'm going to put it here because these two are both very good, but just don't have the same impact on me as these two. So I do recommend it. I recommend all Shaw that I've read so far. I think it's 3 or 4. I'm not sure what this cover. I suppose this cover does have an important point, which is Gritana, when she comes to Earth, is incredibly beautiful. But before, when she was on Molan, they actually tried to kind of distort her to become more human. But actually what happens is she's stunning, kind of thing, right? And she meets another Melanian that kind of helps out with stuff. So that's also part of it. It's what people see of Denny versus what people see on Earth of Molan. of the Millennian Grithana. So yeah, really well done. Okay, so on to the eighth book, and I think this was the longest book. This and the Avatar. I'm just looking at it. It's probably about the same, 300 plus, maybe 400 pages. Now, I was really looking forward to this one because it's my first CJ Cherryh, and I've heard a lot of good things, and I've been kind of putting it off. There's a few authors I've been putting off because I don't, I'm excited, but I don't want to rush it. Now, Serpent's Reach, which again I think is 1980, but the book club edition is 1982. World building wise, which I think is what Cherryh is famous for, was impressive. But I'm going to get that out straight away. So in the distant star system known as the Hydri Reach, humanity is settled alongside the insectoid, hive-minded aliens called the Marjat. So keep that in mind. It's the high insectoid hive. That whole world is investigated really well in this. Like, some of the best scenes, to be honest, are within the hive, and one of the human characters being within the hive with these scary beasts, basically, right? That was the best bit, in my opinion, of the book. So they're called the Marjat. Humans are rigidly stratified. The immortal aristocrats, Contrin, the normal lifespan beaters, and the engineered service class Azi, A-Z-I. So there's actually a hierarchy of humanity, and there's also like a tribal banding of Marjat. The tribal banding is like, if you imagine bees or, I don't know, ant populations and things like that, where they actually had like green, blue, red, gold as their kind of tribes. And each of those tribes, you can guess what red's like, have different traits. And also you've got a queen, and you've got drones, and you've got warriors within the Marjat side. But then on the humanity side, because it's far future as well, is you've got like houses, which are the aristocrats, and then you've got beaters that are like maybe like you and me, whatever, and then you've got Azi, which are seen as the lowest because they're engineered to do, the boring tasks that the aristocrats don't do. So the premise and the structure of the communities, and in some cases the adversaries, is really well done. So basically, when it's called the Soul Sept of the Meth-Marin House is attacked, in alliance with Marjat faction. So this is the importance. Young Contrin noble Ryan Al-Sul, Hant Meth-Marin, that's the whole name, becomes the sole survivor of her line. So that's the trigger point for the whole story. Rayen, R-A-E-N, is basically the sole survivor of a house of aristocrats that were known as being the connectors to the Marjat. So it's like there's a little bit of Dune-esque in there. There's a little bit of the spiritual element of the ability to communicate. But basically it's like a vengeance story where Rayen goes to the outer reaches of the Serpent's Reach, of the Hydri Reach, and plans a revenge on the perpetrators of the killing of her family in her house. She goes all the way out to a remote colony world. She actually has an Azi with her who's called Jim, and he's a really interesting character because he's one of the lowest of the low, engineered, shouldn't be that important. He becomes very important, and it's how Rayen treats Jim, for example, in terms of humanity, and also how Rayen interacts with the insectoid Marjat, the alien, the others, on how the success of the book hangs, let's say. So Rayen turns the system inside out, basically, and she challenges all the hierarchy that exists outside of her house, but also within humanity, but also within Marjat. And she actually aligns with the Marjat in, let's say, unexpected ways. And it changes the power within the Serpent's Reach because she gains respect. There's this time where she's kind of recovering in the hive, and she communicates with a queen, for example, and no one communicates with a queen, right, from outside a tribe or outside the species. So against a backdrop of alien-human commerce, structured oppression and revolt, Serpent's Reach becomes a story of revenge, transformation, and the entanglement of human and alien destinies. So there's themes here that kind of cover some of the others, right? I have to say I was very excited to read Cherryh, as I said, and while this book has some incredible world building, and the mythos and relationship between Rayen and Marjat is really, it truly is really skillfully rendered. I think there's a huge amount. I don't know how late this is a book within Cherryh's oeuvre, but there's a huge promise, and she's a great writer, that's for sure. In terms of imagination and the ability to put imagination in a coherent way on a page, she's definitely great at that. And the best example of that is the human hive storytelling. Some of that was very claustrophobic and scary, and how, for example, how she learnt to communicate or gain trust with this huge, scary insectoid monster that could split her in two with a swish or a bite, mandibles, etc. That was really well done. I don't know. The only thing I got is I just felt I cared a little bit less as I went through the book, and it's not long, as I say, it's 300 plus pages. And she went out to the outer reaches to come back, and there's this big crescendo is what you're playing for, this hope, and it does happen to some extent. I don't know, there's just something a little bit off. I can't put my finger on it why. I'm definitely going to read more Cherryh, and I do recommend this, especially those that like, a little bit like Under Heaven's Bridge, that like the alien and human, how people connect, how these kind of completely alien things connect. Cherryh is more understandable because we can relate the Marjat to animals that live on our planet, whereas Under Heaven's Bridges, these things don't exist, and they're even more. But still good, middle shelf for sure. I think I put 3.5 or something like that in terms of stars. Good story, great start for me in my journey on Cherryh, but just missing something slightly. Okay, so book 9, which is Mardoc. Now, you might have seen this. I think I picked this up in the bookshop in Rochester. The cover is just awesome, like this strange 1980s, I don't know what he is, like cool dude type, right? And I think that's meant to be a portrayal of Mardoc. So Mardoc, by Ronald A. McQueen. I can't find anything out about him. I think he was a screenwriter or just a scientist writer or something, but this is obviously science fiction. First book I've ever read by him, again, 1981, written, this book club edition, 1982. And the blurb is that Mardoc is the ultimate weapon. The weapon built at the height of an intergalactic war, but a weapon that has been dormant and never used because of its fearful potential. So a little bit like, well, at this stage when you're reading that, you don't really understand what Mardoc is. Is it like a cannon or a gun or a laser? But you know very early on that it's not. Nobody really knew what Mardoc was, but they knew that once unleashed, it represented a force which would be impossible to control. And someone had released Mardoc. That's the premise of the whole thing. So it's quite exciting, maybe in a juvenile kind of way, simplistic way, but it is exciting. And it's a strange one to describe. On one hand, it's a fast-paced space adventure. I don't know, Dan Dare or something like that. On the other hand, it's a commentary on the perils of playing with nature. It is that because Mardoc is one of those experimented on. So you can think of X-Men or The Boys, in terms of V and stuff like that, or Harbinger, from where I come from, Valiant, the world of Valiant, the Psiots, and how to bring out the, human 2.0, whatever it is, Bloodshot, things like that. So it's quite interesting in that respect, and also what Mardoc or the ones who are experimented on, what their morality is, like what they're fighting for, is also quite interesting. And there's a bit where one of the guys that was involved in the original experiment is also a bit like Stranger Things, but is also trying to find the enemy, who are the ones that were experimented on, who are the weapons. So do they understand their weapons? Are they seen as a danger, or are they used by governments to for their bidding, right? So it was over in a blink of an eye. I've written down as a reminder. And I'm pretty sure I enjoyed it. I have to say, it was quite recent that I read this. And the ending was pretty good. The ending was kind of, again, it was like, I feel like it's like a playful juvenile story, or someone's attempt at fiction maybe, who usually doesn't write fiction, which is fine. But there's not a lot of depth. Now, is it Typhon intervention problem? I have to put it here. The reason I'm going to put it here is it's enjoyable, right? there's no harm in it. It didn't bore me. I flicked through it. It's very short, and I love that cover. So I'm going to give Mardoc that. So anyone that knows anything about Ronald A. McQueen, please let me know, because I just know nothing about him, and I did do a little bit of research after. I couldn't find him. So yeah, let me know. Okay, now the last one. If you look at that cover, it's a hooded figure going towards like a citadel, right? And I said to you about Road to Corlay. I like these science fantasy ones that are a little bit more. I never thought I would, but the ones that are an adventure of bandits or people flung together to do something with a little science fiction twist. Those are the bits I'm starting to like. So this is Jo Bannister, and I don't think she wrote a lot of books, but you can find bits about her, but there's not a lot about this book. But it was written in 1982, and this is the book club edition in 1982, so published like this. Obviously, my first reading of this author, I didn't know anything about her, really. So in a parched world where the garden city of Chad stands as a rare oasis, the ruthless barbarian warlord Harry Jess conquers it with silver-studded cavalry. So you've got this like ice desert. It's called the ice desert. So it's this vast expanse of nothingness, and then this kind of fortress or walled city, and a barbarian who's a little bit more kind of insightful and intelligent than what we traditionally think of as like the ogre, the oppressor, etc., who's just taken over. It says here he makes a fatal error when he brings along his concubine. So that bedslave and a brilliant nuclear engineer join forces to rescue the last heir of Chad's royal house from Harry's evil clutches. So Harry is the barbarian who now runs the city. There's like a dying prince that you find out pretty early, who's looked after by a hunchback type character, like a deformed protector. His name's Lockwood. Edmund is the prince. And then you've got this mysterious figure who turns up with 3 camels, which is brilliant. And the camels are characters in the story, which I really liked. And he turns up to say, hi, Harry, Mr. Barbarian, I have to service your nuclear power station or whatever. It's all, the whole of the city, it's just a vast desert, is on nuclear, which in itself is quite interesting, right? Because it's kind of, again, pseudo-medieval with nuclear energy. And the barbarian doesn't trust him, and he's like, what are you doing? No, I'll be fine, whatever. It's like, well, it's set to blow if they're not maintained. And the relationship between Poul, his name is, the nuclear engineer, and Jess at the beginning, the banter, the dialogue, the back and forth, the trying to work each other out is really good. It grabs you for sure. Paul's there for a reason, and he takes the bed slave, who's telekinetic, always a good thing. Another character, a helper, the person she was confiding in, the prince, who's basically on his deathbed, and is now addicted to drugs and things like that, and Lockwood, his protector. And they go with the 3 camels, and they exit. It's like he's saving them from something, and you don't really know what it is at that time. And anyway, they go across the plains. They end up at a place called Oracle, which is a female-only kind of hospital scientific institution that's, again, in itself pretty mysterious, and Paul's very against that, and they only go there actually because Paul gets injured. He gets in a fight with someone. I won't tell you much about that, but yeah, and it's like it's a travel story. It's people escaping something and having to deal with nature. Like, it's a desert, it's an ice desert. Like, will they survive? And what are they actually going on to do anyway? So yeah, lots to look at. Really, really good little story that I really enjoyed. So I can say I really like this one. Maybe not as much as The Road to Corlay, which is kind of this plus. It felt like it just had a little bit more in terms of the design of the storytelling and how it flicked between different components. But the opening scenes with a mysterious, witty character called Poul, who arrives at the Citadel and claims to be a nuclear engineer, gripped me from the start, for sure. And as I say, I think I might be a growing fan of science fantasy, as again, the ramshackle trope of people going on a journey really made me smile, like in a very purist sense. I was looking down on this little troop having a fire and whatever, trying to go to the Oracle and making decisions about what they should do. and going on to the next place, I cared. Like, even though it's a tiny book again, and it's very fast flowing. So they had a telepathic bed slave, a nuclear engineer, a fallen prince, his deformed protector, and the three camels, who I can't remember the names. Well, I think one's called Amir, and I think it's like a mummy camel, a daddy camel, and a baby camel. I'm all here for it. Like, I really enjoyed it. I can't say it's top shelf. I can't say it's like one of the best things I've read, and I want to read everything by Joe Bannister. But I have to say that there was something about it that just gripped me, and this cover really does kind of embrace that. So that's my first tier ranking. I enjoy doing this kind of thing. 10 books in a row, all early 80s, so 1980, 81, 82, pretty much, apart from Corlay. SFBC. Hopefully there's something you might want to read there. Reach out if you've got any more questions. Please like, subscribe, and share. And I'll probably do another one of these just for my 2025 list, right? So it'll include a bit of this, but I'll do it quickly, and all the other books that I read during the year, towards the end of the year. So thanks for watching, as always. Cheers.